Tonight, let me tell you a story older than trees, a story of kings and gods, of love and sacrifice, and of a promise so heavy it would shape the fate of nations. It begins in a land called Bharatvarsha, where the Ganga River wanes like a silver ribbon through green plains. There, in the city of Hastinapura, ruled a king named Shantanu. He was a wise ruler, loved by his people, with a heart as vast as the river that flowed beside his kingdom. But even kings carry sorrows, and Shantanu's sorrow was a quiet one. He had loved and lost. Long ago, a wife who was more than mortal. Her name was Ganga, the river goddess herself. She had walked among humans to marry Shantanu, and together they had 8 sons. But here is the strange part. One by one, as each baby was born, Ganga took the child in her arms and carried him to the river, where he vanished beneath the waves. Shantanu grieved, but he had made a promise to Ganga. He would never question her actions. So he watched, silent and broken, until only the 8th son remained a boy named Devavrata. "Why did you spare this one?" Shantanu finally asked. When the boy was old enough to laugh and run, Ganga smiled, her eyes as deep as the river she ruled. "This one is meant for great things," she said. "He will be your pride and your sorrow. Guard him well." With those words, she vanished back into the waters, leaving father and son to face the future alone. Devavrata grew into a young man who seemed touched by the gods. He could lift boulders that 10 men could not move. He could shoot an arrow through the eye of a sparrow at 100 paces. He could recite ancient verses from memory and solve riddles that stumped the wisest sages. Kings from distant lands sent messengers to seek his advice. Maidens wove garlands for him, though he never seemed to notice. To Shantanu, he was more than a son. He was the hope of the Kuru dynasty, the heir who would rule with justice and strength. Then, one spring morning, everything changed. Shantanu was hunting along the banks of the Yamuna River when he heard a sound like music, a woman's laughter, clear and bright. Following it, he found a girl sitting in a boat, her hair as black as night, her skin glowing like the moon. She was Satyavati, the daughter of a fisherman, and as Shantanu looked into her eyes, he felt something he had not felt since Ganga left. His heart stirred with love. "Sire," the fisherman said, when Shantanu asked for Satyavati's hand, "my daughter is no ordinary girl. If she becomes your queen, her sons must inherit your throne. I will not see her children bowed to another's rule." Shantanu's joy turned to ash. How could he disinherit Devavrata, his beloved son, the boy who was meant to be king? Yet how? Could he turn away from this new love, this chance at happiness? He returned to Hastinapura, silent and heavy-hearted, and for days he sat alone in his garden, staring at the river that had taken so much from him. Devavrata noticed his father's sorrow. "Tell me what troubles you," he begged. "I will fix it, whatever it is." When Shantanu finally spoke, Devavrata's world shifted. He thought of his father's loneliness, of the way the king's hands trembled when he spoke of Satyavati. He thought of his own future, the crown, the kingdom, the weight of responsibility, and then he thought of love. Not the love of power, but the quiet love between a father and a son, a love that asks for nothing in return. That night, Devavrata slipped from the palace and walked to the Yamuna. The fisherman was mending nets by the shore, and Satyavati sat nearby, weaving flowers into a garland. "I have come to make a promise," Devavrata said. His voice steadied. The fisherman looked up, suspicious. What promise could a prince make to a fisherman? "This," Devavrata said. He knelt on the sand, his head bowed. "I, Devavrata, son of Shantanu and Ganga, swear by the gods and by the river that flows before us. I will never claim the throne of Hastinapura. Let Satyavati's sons rule after my father. Let them wear the crown and hold the scepter. My life will be theirs to command, but my blood will never sit on the throne." The fisherman's eyes narrowed. "And what of your children? What if they challenge my daughter's sons?" Devavada's next words shook the earth. The river stopped flowing for a moment. The birds fell silent in the trees. "I swear this too. I will never marry. I will never know the touch of a wife or the joy of holding my own child. My lineage ends with me. No son of mine will ever breathe to challenge hers." The gods themselves heard this vow. Flowers rained from the sky. The river sang. A voice boomed from the clouds. "From this day, you shall be called Bhishma, he of the terrible vow." Shantanu rushed to the shore when he heard what his son had done. He held Bhishma in his arms and wept. "You have given me happiness," he said, "but at what cost?" Bhishma smiled, though his eyes were wet. "A son's duty is to make his father's heart light," he said. Satyavati became queen, and in time she bore Shantanu 2 sons, Chitrangada and Vishwarvirya. Bhishma watched them grow, teaching them to ride horses and shoot arrows, never once showing bitterness. He was like a father to them, though he knew they would one day rule in his place. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. Chitrangada, brave and impulsive, died in a battle with a demon king. Vishitravirya, still a boy, became heir to the throne. Bhishma devoted himself to protecting the young prince, traveling to distant kingdoms to find him a wife. He brought back 3 princesses from Kashi, but tragedy struck again. Vishitravirya fell ill and died, leaving no children to inherit the throne. The palace fell silent with grief. Satyavati, now an old woman, called Bhishma to her chambers. "There is a secret I have kept," she said, her voice weak. "Before I married your father, I bore a son to a sage. His name is Vyasa. He is no ordinary man. He is a seer, a weaver of stories, and he has the power to change fate." She sent for Vyasa, who came riding on a chariot drawn by white horses. His skin was dark as night, his eyes as bright as stars. And when he spoke, it was as if the wind itself were speaking. "The Kuru dynasty must not end," Vyasa said. "Bring me the widows of Vishitravirya, and I will give them sons." Bhishma hesitated. The custom was ancient, but it felt wrong, yet he had sworn to protect the dynasty, and so he obeyed. The first widow, Ambika, was terrified by Vyasa's wild appearance. She closed her eyes during their union, and her son was born blind. They named him Dhritarashtra, he who holds the kingdom firmly, though how a blind man could hold a kingdom, no one knew. His second widow, Ambalika, did not close her eyes, but she turned pale with fear. Her son was born with skin as pale as milk, and they named him Pandu, the Pale One. Satyavati, worried, sent a maid to Vyasa in Ambika's place. The maid was calm and respectful, and her son was born with skin as dark as Vyasa's, his, mind sharp as a blade. They named him Vidura, and though he was born of a servant, he would one day be known as the wisest man in the land. And so the 3 brothers grew up in Hastinapura. Dhritarashtra, strong and proud, but blind to more than light. Pandu, gentle and brave, with a heart that ached for justice. And Vidura, quiet and observant, seeing truths no one else could. Bhishma watched over them all, his vow heavy on his shoulders. He was the rock of the kingdom, the one everyone turned to in trouble, but at night, when the palace was silent, he would walk to the river and listen to the water. Did he ever regret his promise? Perhaps. But a vow made to the gods is a vow that cannot be broken, not even by a man as great as Bhishma. The years passed, the three brothers grew into men, and the question of the throne hung in the air like a storm cloud. Dhritarashtra, though blind, was the eldest. Pandu, though younger, was wise and loved by the people. Vidura, though clever, was born of a servant and could never rule. And so the stage was set for a story that would span generations, a story of love and hate, of duty and desire, of brothers who would become enemies, and of a promise that would echo through time like the tolling of a bell. But for now, the moon is high and the river sings softly. In your dreams, you can almost see Bhishma walking along the shore, his shadow long and lonely, but his head held high. Sleep, and tomorrow we will see how the sons of these brothers, gods and men alike, would take up the thread of fate and weave a tapestry of war and peace. The sun rose gently over Hastinapura, painting the palace towers in gold and turning the moat into a ribbon of fire. Inside, the three brothers Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidura grew from boys into men, each carving a place for himself in the kingdom's heart. Dhritarashtra, though blind, stood tall as a mountain. His muscles rippled like storm clouds, and when he spoke, his voice boomed like thunder. People whispered that he had the strength of 10,000 elephants, but they also whispered of his temper quick to flare when he sensed pity or doubt. "I may not see with my eyes," he would say, slamming a fist into his palm, "but I see more clearly than most with my heart." Yet deep down, a shadow lingered. He knew some thought a blind man unfit to rule, and that stung like a thorn. In his side, Pandu, with his pale skin and gentle smile, was like moonlight to Dhritarashtra's storm. He rode through villages, listening to farmers grumble about taxes and mothers worry about their children. A king's job is to carry his people's sorrows, he told Vidura one evening as they walked through the palace gardens. Not to sit on a throne and pretend they don't exist. The people loved him for that loved, how he knelt to talk to beggars, how he laughed with servants, how he cried when a harvest failed. But his kindness made Dhritarashtra's jaw clench. Why did everyone praise Pandu so easily? Had they forgotten? Who was the eldest? Vidura, dark-skinned and quiet, watched it all from the edges. He never played with swords or raced horses like his brothers. Instead, he sat with scholars, memorizing ancient texts or wandered the markets, listening to merchants bargain and storytellers spin tales. "Wisdom is not in shouting," he would say, "but in listening." When Dhritarashtra raged or Pandu fretted, Vidura would speak a few words soft, but sharp as a blade, and suddenly the air would clear. People came to him with secrets, with puzzles, with fears, and he always knew what to say, yet he never wanted the throne. "Some are born to rule," he told his mother once, "and some are born to guide. I am a guide." As the years passed, the kingdom wondered who would be king. Shantanu was gone, and Bhishma, true to his vow, refused to claim the crown. Dhritarashtra was eldest, but blind. Pandu was beloved, but younger. It was a puzzle no one could solve until the gods stepped in. Pandu married first, a princess named Kunti, whose beauty was as bright as her virtue. They say she could make flowers bloom by smiling at them, and that birds sang sweeter when she spoke. Later, he took a second wife, Madri, a princess from the Madra kingdom, whose laughter sounded like wind chimes. But happiness is often fleeting. One day, while hunting in the forest, Pandu shot a deer only to find it was a sage in disguise, making love to his wife. "You have destroyed love," the sage cursed as he died. "Now you shall die if you ever touch your wives with desire." Pandu's heart shattered. A king without children is no king at all. He fled to the forest, his wives beside him, and there, in a hut made of bamboo and leaves, he wept. What good is a king who cannot give his people an heir? He cried. That's when Kunti remembered a secret. When she was a girl, she had served a sage named Durvasa, who was famous for his temper. But Kunti had been so kind, fanning him when he sweated, bringing him cool water, never complaining that he'd given her a gift, a mantra, a magic word that could summon any god to father a child with her. Use it wisely, he'd said, before vanishing. Now, with Pandu's curse heavy on them, Kunti knelt in the forest and whispered the mantra. The sky split open, and Dharma, the god of justice, stood before her, his robes white as snow. "You have called," he said, and "I have come." 9 months later, a son was born, Yudhishthira, the steadfast one. Even as a baby, he cried rarely, and when he looked at you, it was as if he could see your soul. Pandu, though heartbroken he could not father the child himself, smiled through his tears. "He will be a king of justice," he said, encouraged. Kunti called upon Vayu, the wind god. He arrived in a whirlwind, his hair wild, his eyes bright. "A son for you," he laughed, "with the strength of storms." And so Bhima was born chubby and loud, a baby who could roll boulders and scream so loud that birds fell from the trees. When he was 5, he wrestled a bear and won. When he was 7, he ate a whole goat for dinner. "He will protect us," Kunti said as Bhima climbed a tree with his baby brother Yudhishthira on his back. Next, Kunti summoned Indra, king of the gods, who rode on a white elephant and held a thunderbolt. "A warrior," he boomed, to make the heavens proud. Arjuna was born that night, his eyes as sharp as arrows. By the time he could walk, he was shooting arrows made of sticks at targets made of fruit. By 10, he could hit a sparrow's eye from 100 paces. "He will be a hero," Pandu said, watching Arjuna practice. Madri, watching Kunti's joy, begged to use the mantra too. Kunti, generous as ever, shared it. Madri called upon the Ashvins, the twin gods of healing and beauty. They came together, riding a golden chariot, and smiled upon her. "2 sons," they said, "as bright as morning and evening stars." Nakula and Sahadeva were born, identical twins with hair like black silk and smiles that could melt stone. Nakula tamed horses before he could speak. Sahadeva knew secrets. When it would rain, which crops would grow, what people were thinking before anyone else did. So the Pandavas, the sons of Pandu, grew up in the forest. Yudhishthira, wise beyond his years. Bhima, strong and loyal. Arjuna, the archer. Nakula, the horseman. Sahadeva, the seer. They hunted together, laughed together, protected each other. Pandu, though he could not touch his wives, loved them fiercely. And Kunti and Madri doted on their 5 boys, teaching them songs and stories, and warning them of the world's cruelties. But back in Hastinapura, Dhritarashtra and his wife Gandhari were not idle. Gandhari, a princess from Gandhara, had heard of Dhritarashtra's blindness, and out of love, blindfolded herself the day she married him. "If my husband cannot see," she said, "I will not see either." For 2 years she carried a child in her womb, a child so large it ached. When she finally gave birth, it was not to a baby, but to a lump of flesh, like a coconut, the midwives whispered. Dhritarashtra roared with rage. Is this my heir? A lump of meat? But Bhishma, ever calm, sent for Vyasa. The sage came, split the flesh into 100 pieces, and placed each in a jar of clarified butter. Wait, he said. By morning you will have sons. And so it was. 100 boys were born, each strong and fierce, with their father's pride and their mother's stubbornness. The eldest was Duryodhana, hard to conquer, a boy, with a scowl that could scare tigers. His favorite brother was Dushasana, just as cruel and just as eager to fight. The 100 Kauravas, as they were called, grew up in the palace, spoiled by servants, praised by their father, and taught that they were better than anyone, especially those 5 boys in the forest. When the Pandavas finally returned to Hastinapura Pandu, having died in the forest, his curse fulfilled, they were strangers in their own home. The palace was grander than they'd imagined, with marble floors and silk curtains, but it felt cold compared to their forest hut. The first time the cousins met, sparks flew dot. It was in the training ground, where Bhishma had gathered all the boys. To learn from Kripacharya, a wise old warrior, let's race. Duryodhana shouted, pointing to a tree at the far end of the field. He was already running before anyone could answer, his brothers cheering. But Bhima, laughing, picked up Yudhishthira and sprinted. Strength is part of the game, Bhima said, grinning dot. Then Kripacharya taught them to shoot arrows. Arjuna, quiet and focused, hit the bullseye every time. Duryodhana, seething, shot wildly, missing the target entirely. You cheat, he yelled. The gods must be helping you. Arjuna just shrugged. I practice, he said. Nakula and Sahadeva, meanwhile, were making friends with the stable boys, teaching them how to groom horses. Yudhishthira sat with Vidura, listening to stories of kings and queens. Duryodhana watched it all, his heart burning. Why did everyone smile at the Pandavas? Why did Bhishma praise Arjuna's arrows and Vidura nod at Yudhishthira's words? What? About him? He was the eldest, the son of the man who should be king. That night, he whispered to Dushasana, those Pandavas, they don't belong here. This is our palace, our kingdom. We'll make them leave. Dushasana grinned. How? Duryodhana's eyes narrowed. I have a plan. But for now, the moon rose, and the boys slept Pandavas in a simple room, Kauravas in silk beds, unaware that their childhood games were just the start of a battle that would shake the world. Can you imagine it? A palace full of boys, some kind, some cruel, all thinking they deserved to be king. Do you think they could have been friends? Maybe in another world. But in this one, fate had other ideas. The next morning they would wake and train, laugh, and fight, and the shadow of jealousy would grow a little darker. For that is how wars begin, not with swords, but with small, sharp feelings. Why him and not me? That should be mine. I am better than them. Sleep now and tomorrow. We'll see how those small feelings grew into something too big to ignore. The sun had climbed high in the sky, painting the training grounds of Hastinapura with a warm, golden light. The air hummed with the sound of clashing swords, the thud of maces against shields, and the sharp twang of bowstrings. For years, the princes, both Pandavas and Kauravas, had trained under the watchful eye of Kripacharya, a sage who had mastered the art of war. But as they grew older, Bhishma knew it was time for a greater teacher. One morning, a lean, dark-skinned man arrived. At the palace gates, carrying a bow slung over his shoulder and a pot of rice hanging from his hand. His name was Drona, and he was a master of weapons. though few knew his story. How he had once been friends with a prince who'd scorned him, how he'd wandered the land in poverty, how he'd vowed to make his son Ashwathama the greatest warrior alive. "I have come to teach your princes," Drona told Bhishma, his voice quiet but steady. Bhishma smiled. He had heard of Drona's fame. "Prove your worth, and you shall have your place." Drona nodded. He walked to a nearby tree, plucked a single leaf, and drew his bow. In one fluid motion, he shot 5 arrows each, piercing the leaf, splitting it into smaller and smaller pieces until it fell to the ground as a shower of green confetti. The princes gasped. Even Kripacharya nodded in approval. And so Drona became their guru. He was a strict teacher, but fair. He pushed each prince to his limits, demanding perfection. In every stance, every strike, every arrow, Yudhishthira, ever the thinker, excelled in strategy. He could map out a battle in his mind before a single sword was drawn, predicting his opponent's moves as if he could see the future. "A true warrior knows when to fight," Drona told him, "and when to talk." Yudhishthira took those words to heart, often settling disputes between his brothers and cousins with a well-chosen story or a gentle reminder of their shared blood. Bhima, with his mountainous strength, was a force to be reckoned with. He wielded a mace so heavy that 2 men could barely lift it, swinging it with such speed that it blurred in the air. He once knocked down a fully grown elephant during a hunt, laughing as the beast staggered away. But Drona taught him to control his power. "Strength without restraint is like a fire without a hearth," he said. "It burns everything, including itself." Bhima learned to hold back, to strike only when necessary, and when he did strike, it was with the precision of a surgeon. Nakula and Sahadeva, the twins, were like 2 sides of the same coin. Nakula could calm the wildest horse with a whisper, his hands so gentle that even skittish colts nuzzled his palm. He learned to fight from horseback, his sword flashing like lightning as he rode. Sahadeva, quiet and observant, had a gift for seeing what others missed. He could read the stars to predict the weather, or watch a man's eyes to know if he was lying. With a sword in his hand, he moved like smoke, silent, sudden, deadly. But it was Arjuna who captured Drona's heart. From the first day, the boy showed a talent for archery that bordered on the supernatural. He could shoot arrows in the dark, guided only by the sound of his target. He could split a hair down the middle at 50 paces. Once, he shot 3 arrows into the same hole in a target, the shafts nesting together like birds in a nest. "Teach me everything," Arjuna begged Drona, his eyes shining. "I want to be the greatest archer who ever lived." Drona smiled. "I will teach you," he said, "but you must promise to serve me faithfully. When the time comes, I will ask a boon of you." Arjuna swore it, and Drona kept his word. He taught Arjuna secrets no other prince learned: how to summon celestial weapons, how to make arrows change direction in mid-flight, how to still his mind so completely that the world faded away, leaving only him and his target. Watched all this with growing resentment. Duryodhana, in particular, seethed. He trained harder than anyone, his muscles bulging, his brow often furrowed with effort. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not match Arjuna's skill. "It's not fair," he muttered to Dushasana one night as they cleaned their weapons. "Drona favors him. The gods favor him. Why does everyone love the Pandavas more than us?" Dushasana grinned, a sharp, cruel smile. "Maybe we should remind them that this is our kingdom, not theirs." But for now, their anger stayed hidden until the day of the tournament, Bhishma had organized it to celebrate the prince's coming of age. Messengers were sent to every corner of Bharatvarsha, inviting kings and queens, warriors and scholars to witness the skills of Hastinapura's heirs. The arena was decorated with silk banners and garlands of marigolds. Vendors sold sweets and spiced nuts. Children ran between the crowds, laughing and chasing each other. Dhritarashtra, though blind, sat on a throne at the center of the royal box. Gandhari beside him, her blindfold still in place. Bhishma stood behind them, his posture straight as a spear. Vidura sat to one side, his eyes scanning the crowd. As if searching for trouble. One by one, the princes stepped into the arena. Yudhishthira demonstrated his skill with the spear, twirling it so fast that it became a silver circle, then throwing it to pierce a target 100 yards away. The crowd cheered. Bhima lifted a massive stone slab, balanced it on one hand, and did 10 cartwheels before setting it down gently, not even disturbing the dust. The crowd roared. Nakula rode his horse in a tight circle, shooting arrows at 6 different targets simultaneously and hitting each one dead center. The crowd gasped. Sheva, using a sword and shield, fought off 3 of his cousins at once, his movements so quick that it looked like he was in 3 places at once. The crowd clapped wildly. Then it was the Kauravas' turn. Duryodhana swung, his mace shattering a stone pillar into dust. Dushasana shot arrows at a row of pots, knocking them all off their stands. The crowd cheered politely, but it was nothing like the roar they'd given the Pandavas. Duryodhana's face turned red. Finally, it was Arjuna's turn. He walked into the arena, his bow in hand, his face calm. He didn't preen or show off. He simply stood, closed his eyes for a moment, and drew back his bowstring. The first arrow split a peacock feather that someone had tossed into the air. The second arrow pierced a ring hanging from a tree branch, the shaft passing through without touching the metal. The third arrow shot into the sky, and when it fell, it landed perfectly in the cup of a man standing 50 yards away. Without spilling a single drop of water. The crowd fell silent. Then, as if waking from a dream, they erupted into cheers so loud that birds flew from the trees. Arjuna, Arjuna, they shouted. The greatest archer, the greatest warrior. Duryodhana's hands curled into fists. His brothers glared, but just as the cheers reached their peak, a voice boomed across the arena. Not so fast. Everyone turned. A young man was walking into the field, his armor shining like burnished gold, his earrings catching the light. He was tall and handsome, with a face that seemed to glow, as if he carried the sun in his veins. No one knew him. He was not wearing the colors of any noble family. Who is that? Someone whispered. Where did he come from? The man stopped. Beside Arjuna, his own bow in hand. I challenge you, he said, his voice clear and strong. Let us see who is truly the greatest archer. Arjuna raised an eyebrow. I do not know you. What is your name? Who is your father? The man's jaw tightened. My name is Karna. My father is Ahirtha, a charioteer in the service of the king. A murmur ran through the crowd. A charioteer's son? Challenging a prince? Arjuna shook his head. This tournament is for warriors of noble birth. You cannot compete. Karna laughed. Birth does not make a warrior. Skill does. Or are you? Afraid to face me? The crowd oofed. Arjuna's cheeks flushed. He could not back down from a challenge, not in front of everyone. Very well, he said. Let us compete. What followed was a display of archery that no one present would ever forget. Karna matched Arjuna shot for shot. He split arrows in mid-air. He hit targets hidden behind curtains. He even shot an arrow that passed through the same hole Arjuna had made earlier, as if to say, "I can do this too." The crowd watched, breathless. Some began to cheer for Karna, impressed by his courage and skill. Duryodhana leaned forward in his seat, his eyes bright. Here was someone who could beat Arjuna, someone who was not a Pandava, someone who might help him defeat his hated cousins. Finally, after hours of competition, it was clear that neither could outdo the other. They stood, facing each other, there, bows still in hand, sweat dripping from their brows, but neither willing to admit defeat. Kripacharya, who was judging the tournament, stepped forward. "This contest is a draw," he said. "Both are equally skilled." But then he turned to Karna. "But tell me, young man, by what right do you stand here? You are not a prince. You have no kingdom. You cannot compete with royalty." Karna's face fell. He had known this would happen. He had hoped his skill would be enough, but it wasn't. The crowd began to whisper. Some laughed. That's when Duryodhana stood up. "I will tell you his right." He shouted, his voice carrying across the arena. "Karna, though born to a charioteer, has the heart of a king. Today I, Duryodhana, crown you king of Anga. You shall rule over 100 villages, with a palace and an army of your own. Now who dare say he is not worthy to compete?" The crowd fell silent. A king? Duryodhana had just made a charioteer's son a king? Karna stared at Duryodhana, his eyes filling with tears. No one had ever shown him such kindness, such respect. "I am in your debt," he said, bowing deeply. "I will serve you until my last breath." Arjuna watched, his heart heavy. He did not care that Karna was a charioteer's son. He had fought. Well, and Arjuna respected that. But he could not help but feel a twinge of jealousy not of Karna's skill, but of the bond that had just formed between Karna and Duryodhana. Bhishma sighed. He could see the future unfolding like a scroll. This day would not be forgotten. A line had been drawn in the sand dot as the sun began to set. The crowd dispersed, talking excitedly about the day's events. The Pandavas walked back to their quarters. Arjuna silent, Bhima muttering about cheap tricks, Yudhishthira deep in thought. The Kauravas, meanwhile, surrounded Karna, slapping him on the back, promising him feasts and gifts. Duryodhana grinned, knowing he had just made a powerful ally. Do you think Karna made the right choice? To swear loyalty to Duryodhana just because he gave him a kingdom? Or was he simply grateful to be seen, to be respected after a lifetime of being looked down upon? Sometimes the line between friendship and manipulation is very thin, especially when pride and jealousy are involved. That night, the moon hung low, as if watching the palace with a worried eye. In your dreams, you might see Arjuna practicing in the dark, determined to grow better, or Karna sitting with Duryodhana, drinking wine and talking of war. Sleep now, and tomorrow we'll see how this new friendship and this old rivalry shapes the fate of Hastinapura. The wind carried the scent of sandalwood and jasmine from the kingdom of Panchala, where preparations were underway for a celebration unlike any other. King Draupadi, ruler of Panchala, had a daughter whose beauty was spoken of in songs, Draupadi, born not from a mother's womb, but from the flames of a sacred fire. They said her hair was the color of night, her skin like burnished gold, and her eyes held a fire that could melt stone or freeze hearts, depending on her mood. Now she had come of age, and King Draupadi was hosting a Swayamvara ceremony, where the princess would choose her husband from among the greatest warriors in the land. Word of the Swayamvara spread like wildfire. Kings and princes from every corner of Bharatvarsha flocked to Panchala, each dreaming of winning Draupadi's hand. Among them were the Kauravas, led by Duryodhana, who preened in his finest armor and boasted that no one could match his strength. "She will choose me," he told his brothers, "and then Panchala will be ours, and the Pandavas will tremble at my feet." The Pandavas, too, heard of the ceremony. They had been living in exile, disguised as Brahmins' holy men, since a plot by Duryodhana to burn them alive had failed. Yudhishthira, ever wise, thought it might be a chance to forge new alliances. "We shall go," he said, "but as Brahmins, not as princes. Let us see what fate has in store." So they traveled to Panchala, Kunti by their side, their heads shaved, their robes simple. No one recognized them, not even King Drupada, who had once been a friend of their father. Pandu. The day of the Swayamvara dawned bright and clear. The arena was filled with thousands of people, all craning their necks to catch a glimpse of Draupadi. She sat on a golden throne, surrounded by her handmaidens, her gaze steady as she surveyed the crowd. At the center of the arena stood a massive bow so large that it took 3 strong men to lift it, and a target, a fish made of gold, hanging high above the ground, its eye the only mark that mattered. King Drupada stood and addressed the crowd. "Brave warriors," he said, "my daughter Draupadi will marry the man who can string this bow and shoot an arrow through the eye of the fish without looking at the target directly, but only through its reflection in a bowl of water below." A murmur ran through the crowd. The challenge was impossible. To string such a bow required superhuman strength. To hit the target by its reflection required a level of skill no mortal had ever known. One by one, the princes stepped forward, and one by one they failed. First, a king from the north tried. He grunted and strained, but the bow wouldn't budge. "It's enchanted," he muttered, storming away. Next came a prince from the south, famous for his archery. He managed to lift the bow, but when he tried to string it, it slipped from his hands and crashed to the ground. The crowd laughed, and he turned red with shame. Then it was Duryodhana's turn. He strutted into the arena, flexing his muscles. "Watch and learn," he told his brothers. He grabbed the bow, his face turning purple as he pulled, but the string wouldn't move an inch. The more he strained, the more the crowd snickered. Finally, he let go, panting. "This bow is a trick," he shouted. "No one can string it." Draupadi's lips curved into a faint smile. She had seen enough. Just then, a young Brahmin stepped forward. It was Arjuna, his simple robes hiding the strength of a warrior. "Who is this beggar?" Duryodhana sneered. "Does he think a holy man can do what kings cannot?" The crowd laughed, but Arjuna paid them no mind. He walked to the bow, ran his hand along its length as if greeting an old friend, and in one smooth motion lifted it. Then twang he strung it, a sound echoing like thunder. Gasps filled the arena. Arjuna knelt beside the bowl of water, his eyes fixed on the fish's reflection. He drew back the bowstring, his body perfectly still. For a moment, there was silence. Then he released the arrow. It flew straight and true, passing through the eye of the fish, splitting the string that held it, and embedding itself in the post behind. The golden fish fell to the ground with a clatter. The crowd erupted into cheers. "Who is this man?" they shouted. "He is no ordinary Brahmin." Draupadi stood, a garland of flowers in her hand. She walked down from her throne, her eyes locked on Arjuna, and placed the garland around his neck. "I choose you," she said, her voice clear and strong. Arjuna smiled, but his joy was short-lived. A group of kings, angry that a nobody had won, drew their swords. "This is an outrage," one shouted. "A Brahmin cannot marry a princess." They charged at Arjuna, but before they could reach him, Bhima stepped forward, his mace swinging. "Touch him, and you die." He roared. Yudhishthira stepped beside him, his voice calm but firm. "We are the Pandavas, sons of Pandu," he said, "and we do not fear bullies." Then Nakula and Sahadeva joined them, their swords drawn. The crowd gasped the Pandavas. They were alive. The kings, seeing they were outmatched, sheathed their swords and slunk away. Arjuna took Draupadi's hand, and together they walked back to the small hut where the Pandavas were staying, Kunti waiting for them. "We're home." "Mother," Arjuna called, "and we've brought something wonderful." Kunti, busy grinding grain, didn't look up. "Whatever it is, share it equally among yourselves," she said, as mothers often do when their children bring home trinkets. The brothers froze. Share? How could they share a wife? Draupadi's face paled. She had dreamed of a husband who would love her, cherish her, not 5 husbands, bound by a mother's casual command. Yudhishthira, ever loyal to his mother's words, sighed. "We must obey," he said. "A mother's vow is sacred." Arjuna nodded, though his heart ached. "It is the will of the gods," he said. Draupadi, to her credit, did not weep or rage. She thought of her birth from fire, of the sage who had predicted her life would be unconventional but purposeful. "If this is my fate," she said, "I accept it. But let us set a rule. Each brother shall have me to himself for 1 year. If any other brother disturbs you during that time, he must go into exile for 12 years. The brothers agreed. And so Draupadi became the wife of all 5 Pandavas, a marriage unheard of, but bound by love, respect, and duty. News of the marriage reached Hastinapura, and Duryodhana flew into a rage. "This cannot stand," he shouted. "The Pandavas are back, and now they've allied with Panchala. They will try to take the throne." Bhishma, ever calm, stroked his beard. "They are princes, Duryodhana. They have a right to their inheritance." Duryodhana's eyes narrowed. "Then we must stop them, before it's too late." That night, in Panchala, Draupadi sat with her 5 husbands, talking of the future. Yudhishthira spoke of justice, Bhima of protection, Arjuna of courage, Nakula of beauty, Sahadeva of wisdom. Draupadi listened, her heart filling with a strange, quiet joy. Perhaps this was not such a terrible fate after all. Perhaps 5 hearts could love her as deeply as one dot. Do you think Draupadi was brave to accept such a strange marriage? Or do you think she had no choice? Sometimes, life gives us unexpected paths that seem scary at first, but lead to places we never could have imagined. The moon rose over Panchala, its light soft on the hut where the Pandavas and their new wife dreamed of tomorrow. In your dreams, you might see Arjuna practicing his arrows, or Draupadi laughing with Bhima, or Yudhishthira deep in thought. Sleep now, and tomorrow we'll see what happens when the Pandavas return to Hastinapura, and then how Duryodhana plans to stop them. The sun hung low over Hastinapura, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the palace courtyard. Inside, the air was thick with tension as Bhishma, Vidura, and the elders gathered to decide the fate of the Pandavas. Now that they were married to Draupadi and allied with Panchala, they could no longer be ignored. Dhritarashtra, his voice heavy with reluctance, spoke first. "My nephews have returned," he said, "and they deserve their place in the kingdom. Duryodhana, sitting beside him, leaned forward, his eyes blazing. Their place? They are exiles. They should be grateful we let them live. Bhishma raised a hand to silence him. They are sons of Pandu, Duryodhana. By right, they inherit half the kingdom. A bitter argument followed. Duryodhana screamed about injustice. Yudhishthira, ever calm, asked only for what was fair. Finally, Vidura proposed a solution. The Pandavas would take the northern half of the kingdom of land, called Pandava, a vast wilderness of forests and swamps where no man had ever lived for long. Pandava. Duryodhana laughed. It's nothing but a den of tigers and thorns. Let them have it. They'll starve within a year. Yudhishthira smiled. We accept, he said. And so the Pandavas left Hastinapura, Draupadi by their side, their heads held high. As they traveled north, the landscape grew wilder. Dense forests with trees that blocked out the sun, swamps where the mud sucked at their feet, rivers full of crocodiles. Villagers they passed shook their heads. You'll never survive there, they said. The gods themselves have cursed that land. But the Pandavas were not deterred. We will build a home, Yudhishthira said, as they set up camp beneath a banyan tree. A home where justice lives, where the poor are fed, where even the smallest creature is safe. And so they began. Bhima, with his strength, cleared the forests. He uprooted massive trees with his bare hands, dug trenches for rivers with his mace, and chased away tigers and elephants with a single roar. This land fears me now, he joked, though his muscles ached and his hands were blistered. Arjuna, ever the strategist, mapped out the city. He chose a spot on the banks of the Yamuna, where the soil was fertile and the water pure. He designed roads that would wind like snakes through the city, and squares where people could gather to trade or talk. A city should breathe, he said, like a living thing. Nakula tamed the wild horses that roamed the plains, training them to pull plows and chariots. He planted fields of wheat and rice, and soon the once barren land turned golden with crops. The earth will reward those who treat her kindly, he said, as he knelt to touch the soil. Sahadeva, with his gift for seeing the future, predicted rains and droughts, helping the farmers know when to plant and when to harvest. He also negotiated with the few tribes that lived in the forests, convincing them to join the new city as equals, not servants. A kingdom is nothing without its people, he said. Yudhishthira ruled with wisdom, settling disputes with stories and kindness. He built schools where children could learn to read, and hospitals where the sick were cared for, even if they had no money. A king's wealth is not in gold, he told Draupadi, but in the happiness of his people. Draupadi, for her part, turned the palace into a home. She invited poets and musicians to perform, filling the halls with song. She taught the women of the city to weave and cook, and she listened to their troubles, solving them with a kindness that made everyone love her. A queen is the heart of a kingdom, she said, and a heart must be warm. But the greatest miracle came when Arjuna met a demigod named Maya, an architect who could turn dreams into stone. Maya, grateful to Arjuna for saving his life, offered to build them a palace. Build us something the world has never seen. Arjuna said dot, and Maya did. The palace he built, Indraprastha, city of Indra, was unlike any other. Its walls were made of crystal that shimmered like rainbows. Its floors were so smooth and clear that visitors often thought they were walking on water, lifting their robes to keep them dry. Rooms seemed to expand when many people entered, and shrink when only a few were there. Gardens grew flowers that bloomed in the dark, and fountains that sprayed scented water, But the most magical part was the Hall of Illusions. Step inside, and you might see a mountain range where there was only a wall, or a lake where the floor should be. Warriors who entered often stumbled, thinking they were about to fall off a cliff. Kings laughed until their sides hurt, realizing they'd been tricked by their own eyes. Word of Indraprastha spread far and wide. Merchants traveled from distant lands to trade silk and spices. Scholars came to study in its libraries. Artists begged for the chance to paint its beauty. People flocked to the city, and soon it was larger and richer than Hastinapura itself. One day, Yudhishthira decided the time had come to perform the Rajasuya Yagna, a great sacrifice that would declare him emperor, a ruler over kings. To perform it, he needed the allegiance of all the kingdoms of Bharatvarsha. Some will refuse, Arjuna warned. Yudhishthira nodded. Then we will ask them with kindness. And if kindness fails, we will show them our strength. And so the Pandavas set out, each leading an army to win the respect of the kings. Yudhishthira went north, winning hearts with his justice. Kings who met him knelt, saying, "We will follow a ruler who is fair." Bhima marched east, his mace striking fear into those who refused to submit. Justice must be served, he roared as he defeated a tyrant king. Arjuna traveled west, his arrows so precise that enemy armies surrendered without a fight. "We cannot win against such skill," their leader said. Nakula and Sahadeva went. South, Nakula charming kings with his grace, Sahadeva outwitting them with his wisdom. Only one king refused to bow. Jarasandha, a giant of a man who ruled Magadha with an iron fist. "I will never serve a bunch of upstarts," he bellowed. Bhima, eager for a challenge, fought him alone. For 13 days they wrestled, rolling in the mud, punching and kicking, neither able to gain the upper hand. On the 14th day, Bhima, using a trick Drona had taught him, crushed Jarasandha's ribs, killing him instantly. With Jarasandha dead, all kings swore allegiance to Yudhishthira. The Rajasuya Yagna was held in Indraprastha, and it was the greatest celebration the world had ever seen. Thousands of priests chanted hymns. Hundreds of elephants paraded through the streets, their tusks gilded with gold. Feasts were held for 7 days and 7 nights, with enough food to feed an army. Krishna, who had become a dear friend to the Pandavas, attended, his presence making the ceremony sacred. "You have done well," he told Yudhishthira. "But remember, power is a mirror. It shows you who you are. Never let it make you forget where you came from." Yudhishthira nodded, but in his heart he was proud. His city was a wonder. His people were happy. His name would be remembered for centuries. But far away in Hastinapura, Duryodhana, Sethed, he had been invited to the Rajasuya, and what he saw there had burned itself into his mind. The crystal palace, the laughing people, the way kings bowed to Yudhishthira as if he were a god. Worst of all was the Hall of Illusions. He had stumbled there, thinking a pool of water was a solid floor, and the court had laughed. Draupadi, standing nearby, had whispered to her handmaiden, "Blindness runs in the family. It seems blind to truth, blind to shame." Duryodhana had run from the hall, his face red with rage. "I will destroy them," he muttered as he rode back to Hastinapura. "I will burn their city to the ground. I will make them beg for mercy." His mother, Gandhari, heard him. "Revenge will destroy you too," she said. But Duryodhana would not listen. He went to his uncle Shakuni, a small, clever man with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Uncle," he said, "help me. Help me destroy the Pandavas." Shakuni stroked his beard, his eyes glinting. "I have a plan," he said. "A plan that will make them lose everything, their kingdom, their honor, even their freedom." And so, as the Pandavas celebrated their glory in Indraprastha, the seeds of their downfall were planted in Hastinapur. Do you think Yudhishthira should have been so proud? Or was his pride understandable after building something so wonderful from nothing? Sometimes success can make us blind to the jealousy of others, and jealousy, as you will see, is a poison that can kill even the strongest kingdoms. The moon rose over Indraprastha that night, turning the crystal palace into a palace of stars. In your dreams, you might walk through its halls, marveling at the illusions, or sit with Draupadi as she listens to the people's stories. Sleep now, and tomorrow we will learn what Shakuni's plan was and how it would change everything. The palace of Hastinapura hummed with a false warmth that afternoon. Torches flickered even though the sun still hung high, casting golden streaks through the marble halls. Duryodhana paced in his chambers, his boots clicking against the floor, while his uncle Shakuni sat cross-legged on a cushion, polishing a set of ivory dice in his hands. "Are you sure this will work?" Duryodhana asked, his voice tight. Shakuni smiled, a thin, knowing smile. "My dice never fail, nephew. They obey my will." Yudhishthira loves to gamble. Everyone knows that. He can't resist a challenge, especially when he thinks he can win. He held up one die, its surface carved with tiny symbols that seemed to shift in the light. "These will make sure he loses, slowly, painfully." Duryodhana's eyes lit up. "Good. I want him to suffer. I want him to watch everything he built burn." Shakuni nodded. "Then send the invitation. Make it sound friendly like a family gathering. Tell him you want to mend fences. He'll come. He's too proud of his justice to refuse." And so a messenger was sent to Indraprastha, bearing a letter sealed with Duryodhana's signet ring. "Dear cousins," it read, "too long have we let pride come between us. Come to Hastinapura for a game of dice, just as we did as boys. Let us remember we are family." Yudhishthira read the letter aloud to his brothers. "A trap," Bhima grunted, slamming his fist into his palm. "They want to hurt us." Arjuna nodded. "Shakuni is a cheat. His dice are magic. He controls them." Sahadeva, who saw shadows of the future, spoke quietly. "If you go, brother, you will lose more than you can imagine." But Yudhishthira's brow was furrowed. He loved games of chance, not for the gold, but for the thrill of risk, the test of skill. "It is a challenge," he said. "To refuse would be to admit fear, and a king does not fear his family." Draupadi laid a hand on his arm. "Yudhishthira, this is not wisdom, this is stubbornness. Duryodhana hates us. He will not play fair." Yudhishthira smiled sadly. "I know, but I must go, for the sake of peace." And so the Pandavas traveled to Hastinapura, Draupadi beside them, their hearts heavy. The palace was decorated with flowers, but the air felt cold. Dhritarashtra sat on his throne, Gandhari beside him, her blindfold still in place. Bhishma and Vidura watched from the sidelines, their faces grim. "Welcome, cousins," Duryodhana said, his smile sharp. "Shall we begin?" The gaming hall was splendid, with a table of polished sandalwood and cushions for seating. Shakuni took his place across from Yudhishthira, the ivory dice in a velvet bag. "Small stakes first," Shakuni said, pouring out a handful of gold coins. "For old time's sake." Yudhishthira nodded. He rolled the dice and won. The crowd cheered. "Beginner's luck," Duryodhana muttered. Shakuni rolled next. The dice clattered, and he won. And so it went. Yudhishthira won a few, lost a few, his eyes brightening with the thrill. But slowly the tide turned. Shakuni's dice seemed to dance for him, landing on exactly the numbers he needed. Yudhishthira's pile of gold shrank. "More," he said, pushing forward his silver cups. "I'll bet these." He lost. "My horses," he said. "My chariots." He lost. Bhima leaned forward, his voice low. "Stop, brother. This isn't right." Yudhishthira shook his head. "One more roll. I'll win it back." He bet his jewels, his robes, the treasures of Indraprastha. He lost them all. The hall fell. Silent. Even Duryodhana looked surprised. He hadn't expected it to be so easy. Shakuni smiled. "What will you bet now, king?" "You have nothing left." Yudhishthira's jaw tightened. "I'll bet my kingdom, Indraprastha." Gasps filled the hall. "No," Arjuna shouted. "You can't." But Yudhishthira rolled the dice. They landed on Snake Eyes. He had lost Indraprastha. Duryodhana laughed, loud and cruel. "Your turn." "To lose, Pandavas. What's next?" Yudhishthira's face was pale, but his voice was steady. "I'll bet Nakula." Nakula froze. "Brother?" "I'll win you back," Yudhishthira said. He lost. "Bet Sahadeva," Shakuni urged. Yudhishthira closed his eyes. "I bet Sahadeva." He lost. "Bhima," Shakuni said, his voice soft. "Bet Bhima." Bhima stood, his fists clenched. "Don't." "You dare." "I bet Bhima," Yudhishthira said, his voice breaking. He lost. "Arjuna," Shakuni whispered. "Your greatest warrior." "Bet Arjuna." Yudhishthira looked at Arjuna, who met his gaze with sorrow. "I bet Arjuna." The dice rolled. He lost. Now Yudhishthira sat alone, his brothers lost to the Kauravas, his kingdom gone. Duryodhana's eyes glittered. "What will you bet now, Yudhishthira?" "You have nothing left but yourself." Yudhishthira's breath came fast. "I bet myself." He rolled. He lost. He was a slave. Shakuni leaned in, his voice like a snake's hiss. "But there is one thing you haven't bet. One treasure more precious than all the rest." Yudhishthira looked up, confused. "Draupadi," Shakuni said. "Bet your wife." The hall went silent. You could hear a pin drop. "Never," Yudhishthira said, standing. "I won't." Duryodhana slammed his fist on the table. "Coward. You've bet everything else. Why stop now? Are you afraid to lose her?" Yudhishthira's pride flared. He thought of his brothers, of his kingdom, of proving he was not weak. "I bet Draupadi," he said. The dice rolled. Shakuni smiled. "You lose." Duryodhana jumped to his feet, shouting, "Bring her here. Bring Draupadi to me. She is my slave now." Bhishma stood, his voice booming. "This is wrong, Duryodhana. A man cannot bet his wife, especially when he has already lost himself." Vidura nodded. "It is not lawful. She is not his to bet." But Duryodhana would not listen. "Dushasana," he called. "Go fetch her." Dushasana, ever eager to please, ran from the hall in her chambers. Draupadi was braiding flowers into her hair when Dushasana burst in. "Your master calls," he sneered. "You belong to Duryodhana now." Draupadi's eyes blazed. "Tell him he lies. Yudhishthira lost himself first. He had no right to bet me." But Dushasana grabbed her by the hair, dragging her through the halls. Her robes tore. Her feet scraped against the stone, but she held her head high. When they reached the gaming hall, the crowd gasped. Duryodhana laughed. "Look at her. Great queen reduced to a slave." Draupadi turned to Yudhishthira, her voice breaking. Is this true? Did you bet me? Yudhishthira could not meet her eyes. Duryodhana's laughter grew louder. Dushasana, he said, strip her. Let everyone see what a slave looks like. Dushasana reached for her sari. Draupadi closed her eyes, praying to Krishna. Protect. She whispered as Dushasana pulled. Something miraculous happened. For every inch of cloth he tore away, more appeared, as if the sari were endless. He pulled and pulled, sweating and cursing, but Draupadi remained covered, protected by the gods. Finally, he collapsed, exhausted. Draupadi opened her eyes, her gaze like fire. You call yourselves warriors? She shouted, her voice echoing. You sit and watch while a woman is shamed. You are cowards. Fools! She turned to Duryodhana, her voice cold. I swear this, by the gods and by my hair that you have defiled. I will not bind it again until it is washed in your blood. And you, Dushasana, your death will be slow, and it will be at Bhima's hands. A hush fell over the hall. Her words were not just anger, they were a curse. Bhishma stepped forward. This has gone too far, he said. Let us exile them. 13 years, 12 in the forest, 1 in disguise. If they are found in the 13th year, they start over. Dhritarashtra nodded, relieved to end the horror. It is done. The Pandavas left the hall, their heads bowed. Draupadi walked beside them, her back straight, her eyes dry. Do you think Draupadi was brave to stand up to them? Or do you think she was foolish to anger Duryodhana further? Sometimes, courage means speaking the truth even when it's dangerous, because some things are worth fighting for, even if the cost is high. That night, the moon hid behind clouds, as if ashamed to watch. In your dreams, you might see Draupadi praying, or Yudhishthira weeping for his mistakes, or Bhima vowing to keep her. Promise, sleep now, and tomorrow we will follow the Pandavas into the forest and see how 13 years of exile changed them. The dust of Hastinapura still clung to their feet as the Pandavas and Draupadi walked away from the palace, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. No one spoke. Yudhishthira's shoulders were hunched with shame. Bhima's fists clenched and unclenched, as if he were already imagining the day he could strike back. Arjuna's eyes were fixed on the horizon, as if he could see the future unfolding there. Draupadi walked beside them, her head held high, but her hands trembled not with fear, but with a rage that burned like coals in her chest. Behind them, the citizens of Hastinapura watched in silence, some with tears in their eyes, others with heads bowed. They knew the Pandavas had been wronged, but few dared to speak against Duryodhana. Only Vidura slipped away from the palace later that night, carrying a sack of grain and a message. The path of Dharma is never easy, but it is always worth walking. I will send help when I can. The first days in the forest were the hardest. The Pandavas, used to palaces in silk, struggled to sleep on beds of leaves, to eat roots and berries, to keep warm when the wind howled through the trees. Draupadi, who had once worn jewels and fine clothes, now mended their robes with thread she spun from plant fibers, her fingers calloused but steady. We are not beggars, Yudhishthira said one morning as they huddled around a small fire. We are warriors. We will hunt for our food. We will build a shelter. We will honor this exile, not just endure it. And so they did. Bhima became their provider. He wandered into the deepest parts of the forest, returning with deer and wild. Boar slung over his shoulders, or baskets of fruit he'd climbed trees to reach. Once he fought a tiger that had been terrorizing a village on the edge of the woods, breaking its neck with his bare hands. The villagers brought him honey and grain as a thank you, and Bhima shared it with everyone, even the animals that lingered near their camp. Strength is for protecting, he told Yudhishthira, not hoarding. Arjuna, meanwhile, retreated into the mountains to meditate. He wanted to grow stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. For months he lived alone in a cave, eating only nuts and drinking from a stream, his mind focused on the gods. One day, Lord Shiva appeared to him, disguised as a hunter, and tested his courage. Arjuna passed, and Shiva granted him the Pashupatastra, a celestial weapon so powerful it could destroy entire armies. Use it only in the greatest need, Shiva warned, for it brings destruction to friend and foe alike. When Arjuna returned to the camp, his brothers barely recognized him. His eyes were calmer, his movements more deliberate. I have learned, he said, that true strength is not in winning battles, but in knowing when to fight. Nakula and Sahadeva, ever the twins, found their place in the forest too. Nakula tamed a herd of wild horses that roamed the plains, teaching them to carry the brothers when they needed to travel. Sahadeva studied the stars and the plants, predicting storms before they came, healing wounds with leaves and roots. The forest is a teacher, Sahadeva said, as he crushed a flower into a paste to soothe Draupadi's blistered hands. We only need to listen. Yudhishthira spent his days talking to sages who lived in the woods, old men with beards as long as rivers, who had renounced the world to seek truth. They taught him about Dharma, about how to do what is right even when it hurts, about how suffering can purify the soul like fire purifies gold. Your mistake with the dice was great, one sage told him, but your willingness to atone is greater. That is the mark of a true king. And Draupadi? She became the heart of their little family. When the brothers argued, she mediated. When they despaired, she told stories of their father Pandu, of Krishna, of the day they would return to Hastinapura and set things right. She never forgot the humiliation in the gaming hall, but her anger softened into a quiet resolve. Revenge is not sweet, she told Bhima one night as he sharpened his mace. Justice is, and we will have it. Krishna, though he did not visit often, watched over them. Sometimes he sent messengers with gifts, fine cloth for Draupadi, a new bowstring for Arjuna, a book of wisdom for Yudhishthira. Once he appeared in a dream to Yudhishthira, his form glowing like the sun. The 13th year will be the hardest, he said, for you must hide not just your faces, but your hearts. Remember who you are, even when you pretend to be someone else. As the 12th year drew to a close, the Pandavas gathered to plan their disguise for the final year of exile. We must go to a place where no one knows us, Yudhishthira said. King Virata's court in Matsya, Arjuna suggested. He is a kind ruler, and his kingdom is far from Hastinapura. We can serve him as servants, not princes. They took new names and new roles. Yudhishthira became Kanka, a wise man who advised King Virata on matters of state. Bhima became Balava, a cook with a prodigious appetite, hiding his strength beneath a jolly demeanor. Arjuna, fearing his archery skills, would give him away, shaved his head, and dressed as a eunuch named Brihanala, teaching dance and music to Virata's daughter, Atara. Nakula became Granthika, a stable boy who cared for the king's horses. Sahadeva became Tantipala, a cowherd who tended to the royal cattle. Draupadi became Sarandri, a maid in Queen Sudeshna's household, her beauty hidden beneath plain clothes. Life in Virata's court was strange at first. They had to bow to people they would once have ruled, to endure insults with a smile, to hide their true selves. Bhima struggled most once. A prince mocked his size, and he wanted to crush him. But Draupadi whispered, "Remember the 13th year," and he let it go. Arjuna, too, faced challenges. Teaching dance to Adhura was not easy for a warrior, but he found beauty in it. "Movement is movement," he told her, as he showed her a graceful step. "Whether with a bow or with your feet, it is all about control." Draupadi, serving queen. Sudeshna had to listen to the queen's gossip about the Pandavas, how they were weak, how they would never return. It took all her strength not to speak up, but she remembered Krishna's words, "Hide your heart." Then disaster struck. The Kauravas, thinking the Pandavas were still in the forest, attacked Matsya, stealing King Virata's cattle. Virata's army was small, and he despaired. "We will be defeated," he said. Yudhishthira, as Kanka, spoke up. "Let Brihanala lead your army," he said. "He may look like a eunuch, but he knows warfare." Virata hesitated, but with no other options, he agreed. Arjuna, throwing off his disguise, took up his bow. Atara, now his student, rode with him as his charioteer. Together, they fought the Kaurava army, Arjuna's arrows flying like lightning, his celestial weapons turning the tide of battle. By sunset, the Kauravas were fleeing, and Matsya was safe. King Virata, shocked, fell to his knees. "You are Arjuna," he said. "And you, all of you, are the Pandavas." Yudhishthira nodded. "The 13th year is over," he said. "We are no longer in exile." News of their victory spread quickly. The people of Matsya cheered, and King Virata offered them his support. "I will stand with you," he said, "when you return to Hastinapura to claim your throne." The Pandavas and Draupadi left Matsya, their heads held high. 13 years of exile had changed them, hardened them, humbled them, made them stronger. They were no longer the same princes who had lost everything in a game of dice. They were warriors, survivors, ready to face whatever Duryodhana and Shukuni had in store. Do you think the exile was good for them? Or do you think it was cruel to make them suffer so? Sometimes the hardest trials are the ones that make us who? We are stronger, wiser, more ready to fight for what is right. The moon rose over the forest as they traveled, lighting their path. In your dreams, you might walk beside them, feeling the cool night air, hearing their quiet laughter as they share stories of the years gone by. Sleep now, and tomorrow we will see what happens when the Pandavas finally return to Hastinapura and demand what is theirs. The air in the Pandavas' camp hummed with a quiet tension, like the stillness before a storm. The 13th year had ended, and the brothers stood at the edge of Matsya, their eyes turned toward Hastinapura. The forest had taught them patience. But now that patience frayed at the edges, how long could they wait for what was rightfully theirs? Yudhishthira sat cross-legged on a bed of kusha grass, his fingers tracing the edge of a worn book of hymns. Draupadi knelt beside him, grinding turmeric into a paste for Arjuna's bowstring, her jaw set. "We must send word," she said, her voice low, "not as beggars, but as princes. Let them know we are not afraid." Bhima, who had been splitting firewood with his bare hands, tossed a log aside. "Let me go," he said, flexing his shoulders. "I'll knock down their gates and drag Duryodhana here by his hair. He'll give us the whole kingdom then." Arjuna shook his head, stringing an arrow with deliberate slowness. "Violence first is not dharma, Bhima. We must give them a chance to choose peace." He paused, his gaze steady. 5 villages. That is our offer. No more, no less." Sahadeva, who had been studying the stars, nodded. "The omens are clear. If we ask for little, the refusal will weigh heavier on their souls. The world will see they fight not for honor, but for greed. And so a messenger was chosen, a Brahmin named Kashyapa, known for his calm voice and unshakable integrity. He carried a scroll sealed with Yudhishthira's signet, its words carefully chosen. To our uncle Dhritarashtra and cousins the Kauravas, greetings. 13 years we have wandered, as agreed. Now we ask only for 5 villages, one for each of us, to rule with justice. This is all. We seek no war, only peace. Kashyapa traveled for 7 days, the scroll tucked safely in his robe, until he reached Hastinapura. The city was ablaze with activity. Blacksmiths hammered swords, elephants were fitted with armor, and soldiers drilled in the streets. Duryodhana had been preparing for war since the day the Pandavas left Dot in the palace. Hall, Dhritarashtra sat on his throne, Gandhari beside him, her blindfold a stark white against her dark robes. Bhishma stood at attention, his expression grim, while Vidura hovered near the door as if ready to flee. Duryodhana paced the floor, his boots thudding, while Shakuni lounged on a cushion, counting his dice. Kashyapa bowed, unrolled the scroll, and read Yudhishthira's words. When he finished, a silence fell thick enough to cut with a knife. Dhritarashtra cleared his throat. 5 villages, he said, his voice trembling. That is a small price for peace. Let us grant it before what? Duryodhana snapped, spinning around. Before they grow stronger? Before they march here with their Panchala allies and burn our city? I tell you, they want more. This is a trick. Shakuni ski, rolling a die between his fingers. The boy speaks sense, brother. Give them an inch, and they'll take a mile. Remember Indraprastha, how they built a kingdom from nothing? Do you want them to do it again, on land that is ours? Bhishma stepped forward, his voice like stone. They ask for 5 villages, Duryodhana. 5. We rule hundreds. To refuse is to spit on Dharma. Think of the gods, they watch us. Let them watch, Duryodhana shouted. I am not afraid of gods or men. I will not give them anything. Not a blade of grass, not a grain of sand, not a needle's point of land. The words hung in the air, a challenge to the heavens. Kashyapa bowed again, his face calm. I shall carry your reply to my lords, he said, and left, the hall silent behind him. When he returned to the Pandavas' camp, the sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of red. They refuse, he said. Duryodhana says he will not give you even a needle's point of land. Bhima roared, sending birds scattering from the trees. That's it. No more talk. Tomorrow we march. Wait. Yudhishthira held up a hand. There is one more who can speak for us. Krishna. If he cannot move them, then we fight. Krishna arrived 3 days later, riding a chariot drawn by 4 white horses, his skin dark as night, his eyes like lotus petals. He carried no weapons, only a flute, which he played softly as he entered the camp. I have heard, he said, sitting beside Yudhishthira. Tell me your heart, cousin. We want peace, Yudhishthira said. But we will not be slaves. If they refuse 5 villages, we have no choice. Krishna nodded. I will go to Hastinapura. I will speak not as a warrior, but as a friend. Let us see if their hearts can still be turned. The next morning, Krishna's chariot rolled into Hastinapura, crowds lining the streets to catch a glimpse of him. Children ran beside the horses, singing his name, while elders bowed, murmuring prayers. He was more than a prince, he was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in dark times, wisdom could prevail. In the palace hall, he stood before Dhritarashtra, his voice gentle but firm. Uncle, let us end this. The Pandavas ask for 5 villages. Give them, and the bloodshed stops. Refuse, and you will drown in the consequences. Duryodhana sneered. You come to beg for them? Have they paid you with their precious Indraprastha gold? Krishna's gaze turned cold. I come because I grieve for you, Duryodhana. You are blind, like your father, but not in the eyes. You cannot see that greed is a fire that burns the hand that feeds it. The Pandavas are your family. Why must you destroy them? Family? Duryodhana laughed. They are thieves. They stole my birthright, my kingdom, my glory. Is not in a crown, Krishna said. It is in doing what is right. Your father sits on a throne he did not earn. The Pandavas ask for crumbs, and you call it theft? Shame on you. Gandhari, her blindfold still in place, reached out to touch Krishna's hand. Please, she said, he is my son. I know his anger, but he is not evil. Talk to him. Make him see. But Duryodhana turned his back. Get out. If you stand with them, you are my enemy, and I do not spare enemies. Krishna sighed, turning to leave. At the door, he paused. Remember this, Duryodhana. When the battle starts, when your brothers fall, when the ground runs red with blood, you did this. For 5 villages. As he rode away, the sky darkened, thunder rumbling in the distance. The gods were angry. The people whispered. War was coming, and no one could stop it. Back in the Pandavas' camp, Krishna told them what had happened. Yudhishthira closed his eyes, then opened them, his resolve hard as steel. We gather our allies, he said. Panchala, Matsya, the Yadavas all who believe in Dharma. We march to Kurukshetra, and there we fight. The brothers nodded, their faces set. Arjuna polished his bow, Gandiva, until it shone. Bhima oiled his mace, its surface glinting. Draupadi tied an amulet around Yudhishthira's neck, a gift from her father, to protect him in battle. Justice will be done, she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. Do you think there was any other way? Could Duryodhana have changed his mind? Sometimes pride is a prison, and the only way out is to burn the walls down, even if you burn with them. That night, the moon hid behind clouds, and the wind carried the sound of drums from Hastinapura. In your dreams, you might hear Krishna's flute, soft and sad, or the clatter of weapons being readied, or the whispered prayers of mothers fearing for their sons. Sleep now, and tomorrow we will stand on the field of Kurukshetra, where the greatest war the world has ever seen will begin. The moon hung low over Kurukshetra, a silver sliver slicing through the dark, casting pale light on the fields where 2 great armies waited. To the north, the Kaurava forces stretched like a shadow, hundreds of thousands of soldiers. There, tents a sea of brown, their elephants trumpeting softly in the night. To the south, the Pandava army glowed like a scattered constellation, smaller but brighter, their banners emblazoned with the symbols of Dharma. A lion, a lotus, a bow. Between them lay silence. Not the calm of peace, but the thick, breathless silence of a storm about to break. In the Pandava camp, Arjuna sat in his chariot, his bow Gandiva propped against the wheel, his fingers tracing the edge of an arrow. Krishna, dressed as his charioteer, held the reins, his eyes steady as he watched the stars. You've barely spoken all night, Krishna said, his voice soft. Arjuna looked up, his face haggard. What is there to say? Tomorrow we fight. Fight for what is right, Krishna said, but Arjuna shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. Right? Look at them, Krishna. Look at who we face. He pointed north, his arm trembling. There is Bhishma, who taught me to hold a bow. There is Drona, who gave me the secrets of celestial weapons. There is my uncle Dhritarashtra's son, my own cousin, who played with me in the palace gardens. There are old men, boys, fathers all bound by blood or love. How can I raise my arrow against them? Krishna's gaze softened. You think this is easy for them too? They see you, Arjuna the boy, who once shared their meals, who laughed at their jokes. Do you think they want to fight you? Then why fight at all? Arjuna cried, dropping his arrow. Let them have the kingdom. I'll live in the forest. I'll tend cows. Anything but this. He buried his face in his hands. I can't do it, Krishna. I can't kill them. For a long moment, Krishna said nothing. Then he clucked his tongue, and the chariot moved forward, rolling silently between the two armies until it stood in the no-man's land, where dawn would first touch the field. Look, he said. Arjuna lifted his head. In the dim light, he could see the faces of the Kaurava soldiers, some fierce, some fear-stricken, some with tears streaming down their cheeks. He saw Bhishma, his white hair blowing in the wind, his posture straight as a spear, but his eyes sad. He saw Drona, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the ground as if searching for answers. He saw Duryodhana, his chest puffed with pride, but his hands clenched at his sides. I see them, Arjuna whispered. That's the problem. Krishna laid a hand on his shoulder, and suddenly his voice changed, not harsh, but clear, as if it echoed from the mountains and the stars. You grieve for those who should not be grieved for, he said. The wise grieve neither for the living nor the dead. The soul is never born, nor does it die. It does not perish when the body is destroyed. It is old. It wears new bodies. Like you wear new clothes. Why grieve for a cloak that is cast aside? Arjuna stared at him, confusion clouding his eyes. The soul is immortal? Everlasting, Krishna said. You cannot kill it with arrows, nor burn it with fire, nor drown it in water. It is unbreakable, unburnable, unchangeable. What you see as death is but a change like the moon hiding behind clouds, only to shine again. Arjuna's breath caught. But the body, the love we feel for it, love the soul, not the shell, Krishna said. Love the light, not the lamp. When the lamp breaks, the light remains. When the body falls, the soul moves on. He paused, his gaze deepening. You think you kill Bhishma when you shoot him? No, you free him from a body that grows old, a body bound by oaths he can no longer bear. You help him return to the source from which he came. Arjuna shook his head. It sounds like a trick, Krishna. A way to make murder feel holy. Is it murder to fulfill your dharma? Krishna asked. You are a warrior, Arjuna, not a hermit. Your duty is to protect what is right, to stand against injustice, even when it wears the face of family. A farmer who refuses to plow his field starves his people. A teacher who refuses to correct his students lets them wander in darkness. A warrior who refuses to fight for dharma lets evil triumph. But duty feels like a chain, Arjuna said. Then wear it lightly, Krishna said. Do your duty, but do not cling to the fruit of your actions. Fight because it is right, not because you crave victory. Defend dharma because it is your purpose, not because you want glory. This is karma yoga, the path of action without attachment. It is the way of the wise. Arjuna thought of his 13 years in exile, of Yudhishthira sitting silently through insults, of Bhima swallowing his rage to protect the family, of Draupadi mending their robes with a smile when her heart was breaking. They had acted, not for reward, but because it was right. What if I fail? He asked, his voice small. Failure is in the mind, Krishna said. If you act with purity of heart, you never truly fail. The gods see your intent, not just your outcome. Even if the body falls, the soul walks away unshaken. He leaned forward, his eyes blazing with a light that seemed to come from within. Look at me, Arjuna. Look well. Suddenly, Krishna's form began to change. His body expanded, filling the sky, until Arjuna saw not just a man, but all of creation. Suns and moons spinning in his hair, galaxies swirling in his eyes, warriors fighting in his chest, sages meditating on his palms. He heard the roar of lions and the whisper of saints, the cry of newborns and the sigh of the dying all at once, all part of Krishna. I am the beginning and the end, Krishna said, his voice thundering like 1,000 storms. I am the seed in the ground and the fruit on the tree. I am the justice that punishes and the mercy that forgives. I am the war you fight and the peace for which you fight. All who live, live in me. All who die, return to me. Arjuna fell to his knees, trembling, unable to speak. Rise, Krishna said, his form shrinking back to that of a man. You have seen the truth. Now act on it. Fight not with hatred, but with love for Dharma, love for the soul, love for the order that binds the world together. Arjuna stood, his legs unsteady, but his heart lighter than it had been in days. He picked up Gandiva, his fingers wrapping around the bowstring with a familiarity that felt like coming home. I understand, he said. Do you? Krishna asked. I fight because I must, Arjuna said. Not for victory, but for what is right. Not to kill, but to free. Not out of hatred, but out of love for the soul that cannot die, for the Dharma that must live. Krishna smiled. Then let the sun rise. As if on cue, the eastern sky lightened, pink and gold bleeding into the dark. The first rays touched the field, gilding the spears and banners, turning the faces of the soldiers from shadows into flesh and blood. Arjuna drew back the bowstring. An arrow knocked, his eyes steady. He saw Bhishma, and for a moment he remembered the old man teaching him to aim for the heart of a target, not its edges. He saw Drona, and he heard the sage's voice. Skill is in the mind, not the hand. He saw Duryodhana, and he felt sorrow, not anger for the man who had let pride blind him. But he did not lower the bow. Shall I sound the conch? Krishna asked. Arjuna nodded that the sound of Krishna's conch, Panchajanya, split the air clear, loud, a call to duty. It was answered by the Pandava conchs, Yudhishthira's Anantavijaya, Bhima's Pandra, Arjuna's Devadatta, Nakula's and Sahadeva's Sagosha. From the Kaurava camp, the conchs roared in reply. The war had begun. Do you think Arjuna made the right choice? To fight, even when it hurt? Sometimes, the hardest thing about doing what is right is knowing it will cost you, and choosing to pay the price anyway. The sun climbed higher, pinking the field in gold. In your dreams, you might hear the conchs, or see Arjuna's arrow fly, or feel Krishna's hand on your shoulder, whispering that duty is not a burden, but a gift. Sleep now, and tomorrow we will watch the battle unfold, with all its sorrow, all its courage, all its truth. The first light of dawn spilled over Kurakshetra like liquid gold, turning the dust of the battlefield into a shimmering veil. The air trembled with the sound of conchs, trumpets, and the low chanting of priests' prayers for victory, for mercy, for the souls that would soon depart. On one side, the Kaurava army stretched to the horizon. a sea of chariots with silver wheels, elephants draped in red cloth, and infantrymen gripping swords that glinted like shards of the sun. On the other, the Pandava forces stood smaller but taut, their banners emblazoned with the sign of the lotus, a symbol of purity. Even in war, at the forefront of the Kaurava lines rode Bhishma, his white hair streaming in the wind, his bow held, steady in hands that had not known weakness for a century. Beside him was Drona, his face lined with sorrow, but his posture unyielding. The celestial weapons he'd taught Arjuna now strapped to his chariot. Behind them marched Duryodhana, his armor polished to a shine, his eyes fixed on Yudhishthira's chariot as if he could burn it down with a glance. "Today we end this," he shouted to his brothers, his voice carrying over the ranks. "Today the Pandavas learned their place." On the Pandava side, Yudhishthira sat tall in his chariot, his crown tilted slightly, a look of grim resolve on his face. "Remember," he called to his men, "we fight not for land, but for Dharma. Spare the innocent, honor the elders. Let our swords be clean, even in blood." Beside him, Bhima flexed his fingers around the handle of his mace, his jaw set. "Innocent?" "They dragged Draupadi through the hall like a prisoner," he muttered. "I'll show them honor when I crack Duryodhana's skull." Arjuna, his chariot driven by Krishna, hovered at the center, his bow Gandiva already strung. His eyes scanned the Kaurava lines, and when they fell on Bhishma, his grip tightened. "That is the man who taught me to shoot," he said to Krishna, his voice thick. "How do I aim at him?" Krishna's reply was soft, but steady. "You aim at his armor, not his heart. Remember, you free his soul, you do not kill it." The first clash came like a thunderclap. The Kaurava left flank, led by Dushasana, charged forward, their chariots kicking up clouds of dust. Bhima, roaring like a storm, met them head-on, his mace swinging in arcs that sent men and horses flying. One blow crumpled a chariot's wooden frame. Another shattered a soldier's shield as if it were made of clay. "This is for Draupadi," he bellowed, and the Pandava soldiers cheered, their spirits lifting. On the right, Arjuna's arrows flew like rain. He shot down Duryodhana's standard-bearer, the flag toppling to the ground, a symbolic blow that sent a murmur through the Kaurava ranks. But when Drona's chariot advanced, Arjuna hesitated. "He was my guru," he said, lowering his bow. "I cannot strike him." Drona, seeing his pause, raised his own bow, but then lowered it too. "Go, Arjuna," he called across the chaos. "Fight with honor, and I shall do the same. May the best man win." It was a moment of strange grace, a breath between blows, before the battle swallowed them again. Bhishma, meanwhile, cut through the Pandava lines like a scythe. His arrows found their marks with the precision of a sage's words, here piercing a charioteer's throat, there slicing the reins of a war elephant, sending it trumpeting into the Kaurava ranks by mistake. "He fights like a god," Yudhishthira muttered, watching from a distance. "How do we stop him?" Vidura, who had slipped away from Hastinapura to join the Pandavas as an advisor, rode up beside him. "Bhishma has a weakness," he said. "A vow. He will not raise his hand against a woman, or a eunuch, or one who has taken a vow of celibacy." Yudhishthira's eyes widened. "But we have no such warriors. Arjuna once dressed as a eunuch," Vidura said. "During the 13th year, if he takes that form again, Bhishma will hold back." A murmur of unease ran through the Pandava. "Leaders, is that Dharma?" Nakula asked. "To trick a man bound by his vows?" Yudhishthira closed his eyes, as if weighing the question against all he'd learned in the forest. "Bhishma fights for injustice," he said finally. "To stop him, we must use his own honor as a shield. It is not trickery, it is wisdom." So Arjuna dismounted, and his men helped him slip into the robes of Brihanala, the eunuch dancer. He'd pretended to be in Virata's court. When he returned to his chariot, his face painted with kohl, his hair tied in feminine braids, Bhishma's arrows faltered. "What is this?" he muttered, lowering his bow. "A jest? A trick?" Arjuna said nothing. He simply raised Gandiva and shot not at Bhishma, but at the soldiers around him, clearing a path through the Kaurava lines. Bhishma, bound by his vow, could only watch, his jaw tight with frustration. By midday, the field was strewn with the wreckage of chariots and the bodies of the fallen. Crows circled overhead, and the air reeked of blood and sweat. But amid the chaos, small acts of humanity still flickered. A Pandava soldier, helping a wounded Kaurava boy drink from his water skin. A Kaurava archer sparing an old Pandava priest, muttering, "He's not a warrior." Duryodhana, seeing Bhishma hesitate, roared with anger, "Fight, old man, or are you too soft for war?" Bhishma turned to him, his eyes like flint. "I fight for the throne, not for cruelty," he said. "Remember that, boy, when your victory tastes like ash." As the sun dipped toward the west, both armies pulled back, exhausted. The Pandavas had held their ground, but at a cost. Hundreds of their men lay dead. The Kauravas, too, had suffered. Bhishma's pause had let the Pandavas regroup, and Arjuna's arrows had thinned their ranks. In the Pandava camp, Draupadi tended to the wounded, her hands steady as she wrapped bandages around the soldiers. "Gash, you did well," she said to Yudhisthira, who stood staring at the battlefield, his face pale. "Did we?" he asked. "We tricked Bhishma. Is that what Dharma looks like?" Krishna, who had been cleaning Arjuna's arrows, looked up. "Dharma is a river, Yudhisthira. It bends, but it never breaks. Sometimes you must step into the shallows to avoid the rapids." Arjuna, still in his Brihanala robes, sat beside them, his head in his hands. "I felt sick," he said, pretending to be something I'm not, using his honor against him. "But you did not strike him," Krishna said. "You honored his vow, even as you used it. That is the balance." Night fell, and with it a strange quiet. The Kaurava camp echoed with drunken boasts and the clatter of dice. Duryodhana, celebrating a day he thought was a victory. The Pandava camp, though, was somber. Priests chanted over the dead, and mothers wept for sons they would never see again. Yudhisthira walked among the soldiers, his head bowed. "Tomorrow will be harder," he said to no one in particular, "but we walk on." Do you think they were right to trick Bhishma? Or was that a step too far from Dharma? Sometimes the line between wisdom and trickery is thinner than a blade, and just as sharp. The moon rose, and the stars came out, watching over Kurukshetra like silent witnesses. In your dreams, you might hear the clash of swords fading into the night, or the soft prayers of the wounded, or Krishna's voice, gentle as a lullaby, saying that even in war, light finds a way. Sleep now, and tomorrow we will see what the second day of battle brings: more bloodshed, more choices, more of Dharma's quiet fight to survive. The sun rose and set 11 times over Kurukshetra, each day painting the field in new shades of red and gold, each night echoing with the moans of the wounded and the laments of those who'd lost sons, fathers, brothers. By the 10th day, the air smelled of rot and ash, And even the birds had stopped singing. Too many bodies littered the ground. Too much sorrow hung in the sky. It was on the 10th day that Bhishma fell. He had fought valiantly, his arrows still finding their marks, with the precision of a man half his age, but his heart was heavy. He saw the bloodshed, the young lives snuffed out, the way Dharma was fraying like an old rope. "I cannot fight anymore," he told his charioteer as the Pandava forces advanced. "Let me lie down." They laid him on a bed of arrows, his own arrows sharpened and arranged like a bedframe, a warrior's deathbed. Arjuna, standing at a distance, felt tears sting his eyes. "He was like a father to me," he whispered to Krishna. Krishna nodded. "He chose his end, Arjuna. He fulfilled his vow, and now he rests." Bhishma lingered for 58 days, waiting for the sun to enter the northern hemisphere, a holy time to die, preaching to anyone who would listen about Dharma, about the cost of war, about the fragility of pride. When he finally closed his eyes, the whole field fell silent, as if the earth itself were mourning. With Bhishma gone, Drona took command of the Kaurava army. The old sage fought with a ferocity that terrified even his former students. He unleashed celestial weapons that turned the sky dark, that burned Pandava soldiers where they stood. "He will not stop until we are all dead," Yudhishthira said. Watching from afar, Sahava, his voice quiet, spoke a terrible truth. Drona's weakness is his son, Ashwathama. If he thinks Ashwathama is dead, he will lose the will to fight. Yudhishthira paled. "I cannot lie, not even to win." But Bhima, his face streaked with blood, grabbed his arm. "Do you want us all to die? Do you want Draupadi's vow to never be fulfilled? Sometimes a lie is the only way to serve Dharma." In the end, Yudhishthira relented. When Drona called out, "Is my son alive?" Yudhishthira replied, "Ashwathama is dead," not specifying that it was an elephant named Ashwathama, not the boy. Drona's bow clattered to the ground. He sat cross-legged in his chariot, closed his eyes, and let the Pandava soldiers cut down his body. "I failed," he murmured, before his breath left him. "I failed my son, my students, my Dharma." Arjuna, who had loved Drona like a father, turned away. "This victory tastes like poison," he said. The next great fall was Karna. He and Arjuna had circled each other for days, their arrows singing through the air, each matching the other's skill. Karna, the son of Surya, the sun god, wore armor that made him invincible, a gift from his father, fused to his skin. But a curse lingered. When he needed his chariot most, its wheel would stick. On the 14th day, that curse came true. Karna's chariot wheel sank into the mud, and as he bent to free it, Arjuna's arrow found his throat. Karna looked up, his eyes meeting Arjuna's, and smiled. "We were brothers, you know," he said, blood bubbling from his lips. "Kunti is our mother. I held no grudge. Only wanted to be seen." Arjuna froze. What? But Karna was dead. Kunti, who had hidden in the forest to watch the battle, wept. She had lost 2 sons that day, one to the other's arrow. Finally, on the 18th day, it came down to Duryodhana. The Kaurava army was shattered, his brothers dead, his allies fallen. He stood alone in the field, his mace in hand, facing. "Bhima, this is how it ends," he said, grinning. "Not with arrows, but with strength, like men." They fought for hours, their maces crashing together with sounds like thunder. Bhima, fueled by 13 years of anger, by the memory of Draupadi's tears, by the sight of his brother's blood, struck a low blow below the belt, a move no honorable warrior would make. Duryodhana fell, screaming, "Coward!" He howled, "You fight like a dog." Bhima leaned over him, his chest heaving. "I fight like a man who remembers," he said. "I remember the gaming hall. I remember my wife dragged by her hair. I remember your cruelty." Draupadi, who had come to the field, unbound her hair. She knelt beside Duryodhana, let his blood soak her locks, and finally tied it back, her vow fulfilled. But her face was not triumphant. It was empty, as if a part of her had died with him. That night, the Pandavas thought the war was over. They built a camp, tended to their wounds, laughed weakly at old stories, and dreamed of home. They were wrong. Ashwathama, Drona's son, had survived. Mad with grief for his father, burning with rage at the trick that had killed him, he snuck into the Pandava camp under cover of darkness. He carried a weapon of mass destruction, the Brahmastra, a celestial arrow that could incinerate entire armies. But he did not aim for the warriors. He aimed for the children, the Pandavas' 5 sons, boys who had played no part in the war, who had only come to greet their fathers, were sleeping in a tent. Ashwathama unleashed the Brahmastra, and when the smoke cleared, nothing remained. But when Yudhishthira found them, he fell to his knees and screamed. Arjuna, his eyes blazing, chased Ashwathama into the night, vowing to kill him. But Krishna stopped him. "Killing him will not bring the boys back," he said. "Let the gods punish him." And so they did. Vyasa, the sage, cursed Ashwathama to wander the earth forever, his body covered in festering wounds, his soul in endless pain. "You will never die," Vyasa said, "but you will wish you could." Ashwathama fled, howling, and was never seen again except by travelers who spoke of a man with a bleeding forehead, begging for death that never came. The Pandavas won the war, but victory was a ghost. They returned to Hastinapura, but the palace felt empty. The throne, which they had fought so hard to claim, was cold beneath Yudhishthira. "We have everything," he said to Draupadi, "and nothing." Draupadi nodded. Her sons were dead. Her husbands were hollowed out by grief. The kingdom was in ruins. Was it worth it? She asked. Krishna, who had watched it all, spoke softly. "Some things must be destroyed so that better things can grow. The old order was rotten, Yudhishthira. You will build a new one where dharma is more than a word, where justice is more than a vow." But Yudhishthira could not shake the weight of it. The lies, the deaths, the sons he would never see grow up. Do you think victory was worth the cost? Can a war ever be won when so much is lost? Sometimes the hardest thing about doing what is right is living with the consequences. The moon rose over Hastinapura that night, its light falling on empty cradles and silent halls. In your dreams, you might hear Ashwathama's cries fading into the distance, or the Pandavas' quiet sobs, or Krishna's voice saying that even in darkness, dawn comes. Sleep now, and tomorrow we will see what kind of kingdom rises from the ashes. The years after the war flowed like a river through Hastinapura, slow, steady, carrying the weight of memory. Yudhishthira sat on the throne, his crown heavy not with gold, but with ghosts, the faces of the fallen, the echo of Ashwathama's curse, the silence where his son's laughter had been. He ruled with justice, as he had promised, rebuilding villages, forgiving taxes for the poor, planting forests where battlefields had been. But his eyes held a weariness that no feast, no celebration, no prayer could lift. Is this what we fought for? He asked Draupadi one evening as they watched the sun set over the Ganga. The river still flowed, silver and endless, but its waters seemed to carry the blood of Kurukshetra. Draupadi, her hair now streaked with gray, her hands rough from years of tending to the wounded, smiled sadly. It is what we have, Yudhisthira, not what we wanted. She had outlived her sons, her brothers, her dreams of a peaceful home. But she had not lost her grace. She walked among the people, listening to their troubles, reminding them that even after fire, the earth grows green. Bhima, once a storm of rage, mellowed into a quiet giant. He spent his days in the kitchens, feeding the hungry, his mace hanging on the wall like a relic of a past life. Food heals, he told anyone who asked, better than weapons. Arjuna wandered the kingdom with his bow, but he rarely shot arrows. Instead, he taught young boys to aim not at targets, but at the stars. Courage is not in killing, he said, but in living. Nakula and Sahadeva, still inseparable, tended to the royal stables and fields. Nakula's horses won every race, but he cared more for their soft knickers than trophies. Sahadeva, who still saw shadows of the future, spoke less and less. When he did, it was only to say, all things end. That is their beauty. Krishna, too, faded from the world. One day, he sat under a tree, playing his flute, and his body slipped away, returned to the cosmos, as the sages said, like a drop of water merging with the ocean. The people wept, but they knew he had never truly been theirs. He was a messenger, and his message was delivered. As the decades passed, Yudhisthira felt the call of the Himalayas. And mountains, white and silent, had always haunted his dreams, a place beyond sorrow, beyond time. It is time, he told his brothers and Draupadi. We have ruled, we have grieved. Now we must let go. They set out on foot, leaving the palace to Yudhishthira's grandson, a boy with his father's kindness and his grandfather's eyes. They took no treasures, no servants, only a dog, a scruffy thing that had followed Bhima from the kitchens, its tail wagging as if it knew. The way. The journey was slow, a pilgrimage through memories. They passed Kurukshetra, now a green field where children played, their laughter covering the ghosts. They crossed rivers that had run red, now clear and singing. They climbed hills, their steps growing weaker, but their hearts lighter. One by one, they fell. First, Draupadi. She stumbled on a patch of ice, her eyes turning to the sky. I am ready, she said, and was gone. The brothers buried her in a bed of snow, and Arjuna placed a lotus on her grave, her favorite flower from the days of Indreprstha. Nakula. He stopped to help a wounded deer, his hands gentle as ever, and closed his eyes. The horses will miss me, he whispered, smiling. Then Sahadeva, sitting under a tree, watching the stars. I see them now, he said, and his breath stilled. Bhima, the strongest, fell next. He sat down to rest, his back against a boulder, and laughed, a deep, rumbling laugh, as if remembering a joke from long ago. I'm tired, he said, and slept forever. Arjuna, his bow still slung over his shoulder, climbed a peak and looked out at the world. It was beautiful, he said, and let himself fall into the snow, his face peaceful. Only Yudhisthira remained, and the dog. He climbed higher, the air thin, the sky a brilliant blue. At the top, a chariot waited drawn by white horses, driven by Dharma, the god of justice. Come, Dharma said, your work is done. Yudhishthira hesitated. What of the dog? He has been faithful, Dharma said. Faithfulness is Dharma too. The dog bounded into the chariot, and Yudhishthira followed. As they rose into the sky, he looked down at Hastinapura, now a thriving city, its walls bright, its people happy. He saw his grandson ruling with justice, saw the Ganga still flowing, saw Kurukshetra covered in flowers. It was worth it, he whispered. The chariot vanished into the light. Years passed. The Kiru dynasty faded. New kingdoms rose and fell. But the story remained in songs, in stories, in the hearts of those who remembered. Mothers told their children of the Pandavas, of Draupadi, of Krishna, of a war fought not for land, but for what is right. And in the end, that is the point. Dharma is not a crown, or a kingdom, or a victory. It is the choice to do what is right, even when it hurts, even when it costs everything. It is the river that bends but never breaks, the moon that fades but always returns, the song that outlives the singer. Do you hear it? The song of Kurukshetra. Soft in the wind, the song of courage, of loss, of love, of Dharma. It is your song too. The moon is high tonight, and the world is quiet. In your dreams, you might walk the Himalayas, light as a feather, or sit with the Pandavas by a campfire, listening to their stories. Sleep now and know. All ends, but all begins again. And in between, there is grace.